Hi, my name is John Rees, and I'm going to talk you through 5 of my top tips for starting the new school year with some links to some free resources. I'm an independent educational consultant and I specialise in PSHE, which includes the statutory components of relationships and sex and health education, but I also support schools around behaviour management and spiritual, moral, social and cultural development. I work with Affinity Education Solutions and we support schools with school improvement, innovation that enhances well-being across the community and improves outcomes for vulnerable, disadvantaged and marginalised learners. Affinity also partners with technological providers to reduce costs, to undo other organisational problems and provide support for the development of affordable, blended learning strategies. But I do want to talk about 5 things that I think will be really helpful in terms of engaging your pupils with learning and meeting some of your statutory requirements. Before getting into the detail, I just want to thank and applaud teachers, school leaders and non-teaching staff, of course, who have worked so hard to support children and young people, some of whom have been in school over the last 6 months, but most who haven't. Sadly, I don't think we've seen the last of COVID-19, and I think the first top tip I would offer is around staff well-being. If we're not looking after the staff, re-engaging our pupils with learning is going to be all but impossible. If you haven't already done so, staff would need to be absolutely clear about the coronavirus protection systems that you're putting in place. Children and young people will need to be taught, not just told, how to behave. I would suggest it's essential not only to tell our pupils what they've got to do, but to explain why they've got to do it. And it might help staff to have some micro scripts ready to respond to some of the incidents we know are going to happen. We need to be absolutely resolute in how every member of staff responds to pupils forgetting to wash their hands or perhaps more deliberately coughing over somebody. If it's accidental or just forgetfulness, we might need to remind them. But I think if it's done deliberately by pupils who know what they're doing, then there's an argument that we should be treating that as a matter of assault. Some staff will feel particularly anxious about their own health, or perhaps that of their loved ones, and they will need a lot of reassurance about how to keep themselves safe when they're meeting sometimes quite large numbers of pupils. Some staff will, of course, already have suffered loss or bereavement, and they need and deserve our support. Ofsted, quite sensibly, is currently in abeyance, and I would argue very strongly that although we need to re-engage our pupils with learning, now is not the time to be hammering staff to ensure that all pupils catch up for any lost learning. John Hattie's research and some of the Build Back Better research that you might have seen following the Christchurch earthquake in New Zealand suggests that actually our students will catch up surprisingly quickly. All staff are going to need to support each other. Now, we know that excellent school leaders at all levels provide support kind of down the tree, but I think as sentient adults we know that leadership can be a fairly lonely place, and it behoves all of us to think about our more senior colleagues, whether that's to thank them for a scheme of work, support with some online earning, or just to say thanks, that was a really great assembly. We are all going to have to work together to support each other, and that's what's going to see us through as the days get shorter and people get more tired. If anybody does need support, I'm sure many people will already be familiar with the educationsupport.org, who are available 24/7 to support teachers and other staff. Mental Health UK are also offering free resilience training for staff. Top tip number 2. We know that some children and young people will be desperate to get back to school and to re-engage with learning. Some of our pupils will actually have flourished during their enforced absence from school, and they're going to struggle with the hurly-burly of school life and the routines and expectations that we're going to have to put in place to keep them and us and the wider school community safe and well. Some of our pupils will have been traumatised by being stuck in loveless homes, and we know that some of the impact of those adverse childhood experiences, the ACEs, can adversely affect people's lives and learning for many years to come. The good news is that supportive, compassionate relationships with known and trusted adults can ameliorate some of the impact of those adverse childhood experiences. If we want our children not only to re-engage with learning over the next few weeks, and we engage with education, we're going to have to take time to build those secure long-term relationships. Engaging pupils in these therapeutic or perhaps trauma-informed ways, first of all, will do no harm to anyone, but will actually benefit our most vulnerable pupils the most. I would also suggest it's good for staff well-being and retention and recruitment of our colleagues. The Education Endowment Foundation have provided some really helpful guidance on this, or of course if you want the additional help, Affinity is also here and available to you. The mental health charity Time to Change has just launched their In Your Corner 2020 campaign, which has lots of free resources for schools, which you can access, as I say, for free. The third top tip is about engaging with people from industry. Some of you may already know about Primary Futures for primary schools or Inspiring the Future for secondary school. The parent charity, that's Education and Employers, has engaged with thousands of volunteers from across the country. And if your school registers for free, you can find local volunteers to come in and enhance the curriculum. In secondary schools, I guess these have tended to support careers education, but in primary schools it's been far more about motivation or inspiration, simply broadening children's horizons, or maybe simply developing the social skills that enable them to talk to a visitor. Now, obviously at the moment it isn't possible or perhaps appropriate to have visitors coming into school, but these sessions are now available for free to have virtual conversations with the volunteers. And I think if we're serious about wanting to re-engage our children and young people in learning, this could be a wonderful way to encourage them to talk to people from business, especially if that's linked to the curriculum, to really see a purpose for what we're wanting them to do. The fourth tip is around the National Tutoring Programme. In May 2020, the DfE were already reporting that the attainment gap between disadvantaged children and their better-off classmates could widen by as much as 75% because of coronavirus. We know that the pandemic and resulting partial school closures will almost certainly have a very significant effect on the attainment gap. So the DfE have two ways in which you might wish to engage. The first is available to all schools and provides tuition partners. So the DfE are going to subsidise the cost of high-quality tuition from an approved list of providers, which is being organised by the Education Endowment Foundation. These tuition partners should be available from the 1st of November, and the DfE have said they're going to pay 75% of the costs, which obviously leaves 25% for schools to pay. Although, because different tuition partners will get paid different amounts per hour, it's difficult to say how much that will actually cost the school. For schools in more deprived areas, you should be able to access the academic mentors. So the academic mentors could be recently trained teachers or graduates who will get a week or two of training. They won't be expected to teach whole classes, but they're paid about £19,000 a year, funded by the DfE. So if you're a school in an economically deprived area, you could be eligible to apply to get an academic mentor. Initially, in secondary schools, they're going to focus on English and humanities and maths and modern foreign languages and science. And obviously in primary, it's going to be very much about literacy and numeracy. My fifth top tip is around statutory relationships and sex and health education, and kind of linked with that, Keeping Children Safe in Education 2020. I think if it hadn't been for the minor matter of a global pandemic, we'd have been starting back to school this September with a statutory expectation that all pupils from Key Stage 1 through to Key Stage 4 would have been learning about relationships education. All pupils will have to learn about health education, and primary schools would have to decide whether or not they're going to teach sex education. That expectation is still there, although I think quite sensibly the DfE have suggested actually if you haven't had a chance to get things sorted out, you can take a couple of terms to get things ready for Easter 2021. The DfE have also said that these statutory expectations should fit within a wider framework of personal, social, health and economic education, that's PSHE. And we know that there's some really strong evidence about how learning about personal and social development can improve pupils' attainment right the way across the curriculum. And with all due credit to the DfE, and I don't often say that, the whole purpose of introducing statutory components of PSHE was not just to enable pupils to learn about how to keep themselves safe and healthy and physically and emotionally well, but also to improve academic attainment. I would argue there's a really important place for statutory expectations around relationships education, not just because they're statutory, but if we want to re-engage pupils in learning, we have to think about how things like caring friendships, respectful relationships, online relationships, and staying safe can contribute to this. We know from Maslow that children who don't feel physically or emotionally safe are simply unable to learn. So the statutory expectations around health education, also including things like mental well-being, internet safety and harm, and of course health and health promotion. Just looking at some of the expectations, particularly for primary children around health and prevention, they are spookily prescient. It says by the time children leave primary school, they should know how to recognise the early signs of physical illness and unexplained changes to the body. Children who are just emerging from that global pandemic, where every advert break on the telly would have had something about people coughing or losing their sense of smell, it really could be a perfect way to teach some of the things that children need to know about how to keep well and help them make sense of the coronavirus. Now, I'm sure the authors of the RSHE expectations didn't know we were going to hit by COVID-19, but there is a statutory expectation to teach, for example, around personal hygiene and germs, including viruses and how they're spread, and the importance of hand washing. As part of the statutory expectation, our young people are also supposed to know the facts and science relating to immunisation and vaccination, and I really, really hope that's heading our way very quickly. And again, it's crucial that we teach about this to help young people feel safe, to reduce their anxiety, which is going to impact on their behaviour and on their capacity to learn and achieve. So, on the one hand, I know that some colleagues will be desperate to focus on learning and attainment, but I would respectfully suggest that if we can't do this, we simply can't do this if children's physical and emotional needs aren't being met. So, with statutory relationships and health education, I think there's some great opportunities to teach children about hand washing, social distancing, viruses and vaccination, not just because the DfE have made it statutory, but because it enables them to make sense of the world that's been turned upside down and helps them manage their physical and mental health, all of which, as I say, is going to contribute to learning and attainment. So those are my top tips for returning to school in September 2020. These are going to be extraordinarily challenging times, so please, please look after yourself, look after each other. Returning to school after the pandemic is not going to be a sprint. And of course, if there's anything that I or Affinity Education Solutions can do to help you, we'd be delighted to hear from you. Thanks very much.